Our second scripture today is from the prophet Isaiah, chapter 11, verses 1 to 10. A shoot shall come out from the stump of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of its roots. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord. His delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge by what his eyes see, or decide by what his ears hear, but with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. He shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. Righteousness shall be around his waist, and faithfulness the belt around his loins. The wolf shall live with the lamb. The leopard shall lie down with the kid, the calf, and the lion, and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze, their young shall lie down together. The lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the asp, and the weaned child shall put its hand on the adder's den. They will not hurt or destroy on all my holy mountain. For the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. On that day, the root of Jesse shall stand as a signal to the peoples. The nations shall inquire of him, and his dwelling shall be glorious. When we had lived in Greater Santa Barbara about 5 years, I saw something that was completely and absolutely foreign to me, and caught my imagination. Driving along Calle Real, right at the corner of Calle Real and Patterson, there was a small avocado orchard. And one day, driving by, they had cut all the trees off and painted the stumps with white paint. Now, my experience told me that you cut down trees when one of three things has happened. Either they are sick to the point of dying, they are dangerous for whatever reason, or they are destructive for some reason. And when you cut a tree down, what you do is you come back and you remove the stump, and it is gone forever and ever. That was my experience. Now, that's what I assumed was going on there. I'd heard stories about avocado orchards getting sick and dying. I knew the story of this property, that this had once been an avocado orchard, and there had been some kind of fungus that got in the roots, and all the trees were sick and dying, and so they took them all out. I assumed it was something like that. But the white paint puzzled me. And the fact that they cut the stumps fairly high, it was 3 or 4 feet off the ground. If you were going to cut a tree down and then just remove the stump, why wouldn't you take it right at the ground? It was kind of puzzling to me. So I asked people questions. And I guess I asked the wrong people. Because the people I asked didn't know what was going on. Now, I'm guessing they had seen it before, but really hadn't paid attention to it, hadn't thought about it, hadn't worried about it. It just happens here every now and again. Somebody cuts down all the avocado trees and paints the stumps white. It's just what happens. You know, it's like driving past the vineyards every, I don't know how many years. They pull all the vines out. They do it. I don't know why. But in any case, nobody seemed to know what was going on, the people I spoke to. I searched the web. You can find anything on the web, right? Guess what? I couldn't find why they had done that. I guess I was looking for the wrong things. But I got no explanation. And what I expected would happen, that they would take the stumps out, didn't happen. And a few months later, I noticed they were starting to sprout. And they grew really fast, crazy fast. And if you drive by and look at them now, you'd be hard-pressed to see where they cut them off. They grew that quickly and with that much vigor. And the other piece that I learned very quickly was they had lots and lots and lots of fruit on those trees that had been cut down. Well, when I read today's passage the second time, not when I chose the passage, but when I actually started to write my sermon, those trees came back to mind. And so this is interesting. You know, here we've got this image in Isaiah of the stump of Jesse. I wonder, it's kind of interesting. And so I did more research. And this time, I was able to find out what happened. Now, some of you probably know, and I'm sorry for repeating something that's old hat to you. Some of you may not. Some of you may have just driven by 100,000 times and never given it a second's thought. And some folk watch these sermons on YouTube, and they live in places where their experience is what mine was. You cut off a tree because you want to get rid of it. Well, first thing I learned was about avocado trees. They get really big if you let them go. And when they're really big, it can be hard to reach the fruit up at the top of the tree. And as anybody knows who buys avocados in the store, they're expensive. And you don't want to just leave those fruit up in the tops of the trees for, as those of us who live here know, food for the rats, right? Because they love them. So that's a problem. But that wasn't the biggest problem. The biggest problem happens in commercial orchards. When you plant avocado trees, they very, very quickly intermingle and form a canopy. And the canopy blocks the light from going down to the bottom of the tree, and the branches die on the bottoms of the trees, and they have less fruit because of the canopy. And people who were commercially growing avocados knew that, and they started to think, well, what are we going to do? And they started by doing what you do with all fruit trees. They pruned them, right? Well, you prune the avocado trees, and very, very quickly, they make another canopy. And they thought, this isn't working. So then they tried something that when I read about it, I thought, this is crazy. When the canopy got too thick, they would cut down every other tree and remove it. Well, you can imagine the canopies grew right back. They just had to grow a little bit further. And then they did the same thing again, and before long, you don't have very many avocado trees left. It didn't make much sense, did it? But they noticed something weird that happened. If they didn't get back quickly enough and remove those stumps, they started to take off. And someone had the bright idea, you know what? Instead of pruning, instead of taking out every other tree, why don't we just cut them all off and see what happens? And they did. And what they learned was that because these stumps have a full, mature, vigorous root system, and they're putting all of that energy just into this one little stump, they grew like mad. And not only did they grow like mad, they began to produce lots and lots of fruit very quickly. So within 3 years, they were fully productive and making more avocados than they had ever made before. Plus, it was just a little tree now, so you could reach them. And so, every, I don't know how many years now, commercial avocado growers stump the trees. And they paint them white. That's just white latex paint that's been thinned a little bit to help keep them from being attacked by insects while they're vulnerable and before they really take off. But it is that stumping is what they call it, Stumping the tree makes them much more vigorous, much stronger, and gives you a lot more fruit, and makes the fruit easier to get to. Well, as I was reading that and thinking about today's passage, I began to see the passage in a completely different light. Now, I have to say, honestly, I have no idea if they do anything like that with any trees in the Middle East. I have no idea if growers did that at the time of Isaiah. I don't know. So you could argue that I'm reading something into the passage, but I'm taking a preacher's license, and boy, does it fly. Because it works with this passage. My previous understanding of this passage, and the understanding I had when I chose it 3 months ago, and when I made the title, which is out there on the board and on your bulletin today, was that this passage was about this radical break from the past, where everything of the past had died and been thrown away and gotten rid of, and something entirely radical and new was coming into being. And you can understand that given the situation of where they were. This Isaiah speaks during what scholars call the golden age of the prophets. That sounds like it would be something good, right? The golden age. Well, it wasn't. It wasn't at all, because prophets only appear in the community of faith when the religious leaders aren't doing their jobs. Prophets only appear when the people who are supposed to be speaking for God have decided they're not going to do it anymore. And so, when God's yearnings for the society aren't being preached by the people who are being paid to preach, when God's vision is not being held up by the leaders of the community, God has to tap someone else on the shoulder and say, I know you're not a trained theologian. I know that you're not one of the ones who came from these families who have been leading the synagogue, who have been leading the churches for decades and centuries, but somebody's got to speak for God, and guess what? You've been chosen. You've been chosen. And things were bad. Things were bad. Those with wealth were taking advantage of the poor. Those with positions of power were using that power for their own gain rather than for the larger community. When somebody went to court, the one with the most money always won. And the ones with the least money, well, they always ended up with less yet. God's dreams for a just society had been pushed aside, and the faith leaders had abdicated their responsibility to stand up and speak words of grace and love and justice to those in power. And God calls Isaiah. And Isaiah comes with this vision of what could be, and it's a beautiful vision, isn't it? We've all seen the painting of the peaceable kingdom, but we have to remember that it is metaphor here. That lions don't lie down with the fatling. They only come together when the fatling is dinner. And for a lion to eat straw, it can't be a lion anymore. Because that's not how lions work. Their digestive system can't eat straw. They die. They have to have dense, nutrition-rich, protein-rich meat. That's how they live. So Isaiah is not talking about a time when the very nature of creation changes, but is lifting up this crazy vision that everybody would have said, yeah, that can't happen, of a new reality that is so safe and so secure that the only way to picture it is as if all of creation has changed, as if everything has changed. He's pointing to a reality where safety and security are so complete that only an impossible picture can communicate it. And that's where my new understanding of this passage started to grab me. That God was stumping Israel. That the tree that was Israel had ceased to be the productive, fruit-bearing tree that God wanted it to be. And John the Baptist in our earlier reading, he said, let's just take the whole thing down and burn it. But that's not what God says. God says, no, you know what? I'm going to stump this sucker. And when I cut it off, you wait and watch and see what happens. You wait and watch and see what happens. Yes, the tree is no longer producing the fruit that I desire. It's no longer a society where the poor always have enough and the rich never have too much. It's no longer a blessed community where, regardless of who you are, you can expect justice and prosperity and opportunity. It is no longer my vision for my people. But I'm going to stump it. Because my vision is still there. The roots are still there. And they're healthy. And they're real. And all the people have to do is stump that tree and watch what grows from those roots that I have already put there. That my vision, God said, is still the guiding vision. My dream of what human community can look like is still there. The lion and the lamb aren't actually going to lie down together, but radical equality, opportunity, possibilities, and justice are there, and they're waiting to grow for everybody. And so the tree of Israel is stumped. And from that healthy root system, Isaiah envisions something new growing. He envisions a leader growing from that healthy, vigorous root system who will bring about that new expression of God's vision, of God's dream. And of course, we in the church look at that picture and we see Jesus. We see Jesus as the one who comes growing from that vigorous root system and owning it in all of its depth and richness. It's not something completely and absolutely new and novel. It is indeed the very thing God has wanted all along. It is not something that breaks from the traditions of God's history and God's actions in the past. It is the very expression that God has wanted from the very, very beginning. And it grows because the roots are healthy and real, and they are there, just waiting for the opportunity to put forth their vigor. It's a less radical vision than what I thought it was before. It's less miraculous. It happens in these avocado groves all the time. And I see it, driving back and forth from our home. I see those, all of a sudden, there's all these white stumps on the hillside. I know what they're doing now. And I know why they're doing it. And because of that, we're going to have some nice avocados in a couple of years. Lots of them. Lots of them. And now, when I look at those stumps, I don't give up hope. Indeed, instead, I am filled with expectancy that something is on its way, and it is good. That when something is stumped, we do not give up hope, but instead we reassert our dreams that are based in those deep roots of God's grace and God's love. Now, I don't know about you, But I can look around right now and I can see a lot of examples of things that feel like they're stumped. You know, I'm a pastor. You can't find people who are more intertwined with the institutional expression of the church than a pastor. I get paid to be here, you know. I'd be here anyway. But I get paid, and I get paid to do the things I do. And I have a commitment to that institution. But to be honest, I'm worried about the institution. Every year I get something from the denomination that says, keep your eyes open for young people that you would like to encourage to go into the ministry. And encourage them to go to 4 years of college and build up 4 years of debt there, and then go to 3 years of seminary and build up 3 more years of debt, and then go out and serve the church, and maybe there'll be a position, maybe not. And if there is a position, it may or may not pay enough to be able to pay off all of those debts that you just racked up getting ready to be in that position. And I say, I'm not quite there, because I don't know what's going to happen next. And all of the traditions are struggling. You know, some are following a little further behind. The conservative churches for a long time said, well, we're growing and we're vital. They're not growing anymore either. Southern Baptists are having fewer baptisms now than they used to, even though they've always lied about how many they had. But there comes a point at which you can only lie so much. And we're seeing this parade of young people leaving the megachurches. Because they're hearing these messages and they're saying, I don't believe that. And I don't believe you believe that, really. At least some of the things. And if I don't believe that, why should I believe this? If I don't believe what you say about sexuality, why should I believe what you may say about salvation? If I don't believe that my neighbors are all going to hell, why should I believe what you say about Jesus having died for me? If I don't take the whole cloth, how do I make a decision about which parts are worth keeping? And then they just throw the whole thing away. And so actually, those big megachurches are finding themselves in decline, just like the mainline church has been doing for decades. For different reasons. And our entire culture has basically decided that traditional religious institutions are irrelevant to life. Sunday morning is time for children's baseball. Why would we go to church? Why would we think about people going to church? We can have baseball then, or soccer, or whatever. Feels like it's being stumped. But the roots are deep and real, because it is the church that speaks words of forgiveness to those who are struggling with guilt. And all of us struggle with guilt sometimes, don't we? It is the message of the church that speaks words of love to those who struggle with questions about self-worth. We say, God loves you. Period. It is the church that speaks words of inspiration to those who are just a half a step away from giving it all up. It is the church that says there are programs to which we can commit ourselves that make a difference in the world, because that is worth doing. And sometimes those programs don't ever get to fulfillment. But they're still worth working for. And so we inspire to work for racial justice, to work for economic justice, to work for peace, to work for honesty and transparency in our society. We stand for those things, even though sometimes it feels like we ain't ever going to get there, baby. But that's okay. They're still worth working for. We speak words of grace in a time when grace is sorely, sorely needed. Those are the roots that we have. Those are the roots that we have. You know, scientists can tell us how things happen, but we talk about why. Why? Why? And I look at our congregation, and we're not out of line with the larger church. You could probably fairly easily argue that we aren't living out the dreams of those who founded this congregation. We're smaller than they envisioned. This was supposed to be a chapel. It was supposed to be a big church over there. Yeah. We're more homogeneous. They expected that as the community changed, the congregation would change, and we'd welcome more and different kinds of folk in. We're older than they envisioned. Except me. And we're not as strong institutionally as they envisioned. But the roots, we got the roots. They are deep and real. We have roots in this congregation that we see lived out each and every week. We have roots that say, you know what? We're here for service. You know, we get to hear a wonderful sermon every week. We get to hear a wonderful sermon every week.
Yes.
And the band? Who would expect that you could get music of that quality in a church of this size? I mean, come on. It's you know. And I'm sitting here with people that I know, and they know me, and they still like me. and I could just do this just because it makes me feel good. But that's not why, is it? That's part of it. That's all part of it. But we are here for service, and we do. We serve, and we serve not only as a congregation, we serve as individuals, and we find ourselves inspired to do that because of what happens in this congregation. I'm amazed when I talk about the involvement of members of this church in the broader community and all the things that we do. I am amazed at the giving of this congregation. I'm amazed. And not just financial giving, although that part too, but of giving of heart. I am amazed at the difference we make as an institution in this neighborhood. Every week somebody comes to me, one of the folk from one of the 12-step programs, or if somebody from one of the recitals that happens here, somebody who comes to the concert series, every week somebody comes to me and says, you know, you guys are doing it right. You guys are doing it right. And I love to know about all of the ways that you share the blessings you have with this broader community. And you do it better than just about anybody else around does. You do. Those are our roots. Those are our roots. And if at some point we feel like we are stumped, it is only so that our roots might reassert themselves and become even more vigorous and allow us to bear even more fruit. It probably won't be exactly the same fruit our founders envisioned when they started this congregation, for a whole variety of reasons. But the fruit is still very, very real, and it makes a difference in this community. Isaiah saw a stump, and for decades when I read that passage, I thought it was a symbol of death. I thought it was a symbol of the past being thrown away. But I don't see that anymore. Now I see those avocado trees, and when I see the stump, I think of life and fruit and new possibilities and of God's dreams being realized. And I invite you, when you see what looks like a dead stump, to remind yourself that what you see isn't always what's really there. Because sometimes our assumptions are not correct. And maybe that stump has been cut away just so the roots might reassert themselves. And that is good news. That is good news.